morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here in Portland. I so appreciate the League of Women Voters. I also am a member in the Salem League, and appreciate your attendance here tonight, and also want to say hello to anyone who is watching us via media at a later time. Invite you to investigate the local League of Women Voters and also to follow some of the information from the study that we're going to talk about. Want to come back to talking about the Children at Risk Early Learning, Early Intervention study that the League conducted over the last 2 years a little bit later. And at that time, we're going to have two other panelists with us. Molly Day heads the Multnomah Early Learning Hub. And her counterpart, Bill Thomas, will be joining us shortly, and he heads the Washington County Early Learning Hub. Wanted to set the scene first, though, by inviting you to watch a video. This is called Are We Crazy About Our Kids? It's done by California Newsreel, and it will be released next year or later this year, and will be part of a four-program series with public broadcast systems, PBS, all across the country. I think that you'll find that this video does a great job of capturing a great deal of the information that you read in the study. So that's a whirlwind tour of what Canada's doing, what some of the European areas, what China's doing, what other parts of the United States are doing. And of course, you're probably asking, what's happening in Oregon? What are we doing here? That was the question that we had 2 years ago when the League of Women Voters decided to study Children at Risk, Early Learning, Early Intervention. And we had a committee of about 12 of us who participated in that over the last 2 years. It was a good time to do the study because Oregon had, over the last 4 or 5 years, reformatted a large amount of the system for early learning, reformatted some of the legislation. Some of that was driven by federal demands for funding that flowed through to the state. Others were developed because our governor decided that things weren't working the way they should, so some changes needed to be made. Now, out of that group of 12, you in the Portland League of Women Voters have a special star. Janet Ewell, stand up for a minute. Janet and I have got to know each other very well over the last 2 years because she has been part of this, and with her background in pediatrics and early learning, she was very instrumental in helping us to work on some of those developmental aspects. So I know that you want to know more of what's happening in all of Oregon, but especially here in Portland. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the study as we go through, but first I want Molly to have plenty of time to talk, and then we'll be joined in a short bit by Bill. Molly, people ask me what was my passion and why did I get started in this, and I said, well, you know, there was a time in my life when I didn't think I was really even going to have children. And then my husband and I adopted 2 little boys who came out of foster care system. And they had some special needs. They had some fetal drug exposure. They had some abuse and neglect issues. And I was just struggling to try and figure out where all those resources were. And then a couple years later, we adopted 2 little girls who were 2. They were twins. They came out of a meth lab. And so, again, I was struggling to try and figure out where the resources were, but by then I knew a whole lot more about my own community early learning system and about the Head Start system, and because they were foster children, they qualified for that. And as I continued to study that whole system, I I found myself frustrated because it seemed that we should be able to go to any door and all of the professionals would know about all of those services and be able to connect us with them or to connect other families. And that wasn't true in the state that I lived in at that time. And now I'm in Oregon, and it's an exciting time to be here because that system's developing. Tell us about it.
Hello, everyone. My background is a social worker also, and I got involved with early childhood because I had worked for a long, long time in the psychiatric emergency room, and I thought, there's got to be a better way than dealing with things at this late end of the scale. So I became very interested in young children and in figuring out how to help and support families provide a secure setting for children to grow. And I think that your question about, or your observation about how disconnected the early childhood world is, as though we could go in one door and get in touch with everything, is something that is very organic about the birth to 6 age. When you think about little children, we don't know where they are. I mean, they're home with parents, or maybe they're in organized childcare, maybe they're with the neighbor, and then some of them are in Head Start and some are at church preschools, but we really don't know where our young children are in the state until they arrive at kindergarten. And kindergarten is still a voluntary part of the education system within Oregon, so we really officially know when they arrive at first grade. And that has definitely made for some complicated, continues to make for some complicated processes as we organize the early childhood world. I want to just tag on to a comment you made earlier about our governor. Kate Brown has been very supportive of the work that Governor Kitzhaber handed off. And I think over the last several years living in Oregon and working in the early childhood world, I have just been so proud to be an Oregonian, especially like friends of mine that are in Kansas, for example, for heaven's sakes. I just keep thinking, wow, we are really living in a great time for the kind of investment we just saw in the film, where finally I feel like attention is being addressed to the needs of families with young children. That I can't solve the complicated system issue for you, but I do know that we are on our way to figuring that out. And I'll just say one more thing and then I'll let it go. But I have really appreciated the state's approach to organizing an early learning system by using the I always think of state legislation as like a big stick and kind of a blunt instrument. There's really no way to do a finessing from Salem, but they have allowed the hubs to individualize our work locally. So what we're doing in Multnomah and even Bill in Washington County, we're doing very different things. And when you go to what I think of as the East Coast of Oregon, you know, the much more sparsely populated areas, they're doing a whole different style.
Right. And so the legislation set up 16 regional hubs across the state. And in order to qualify to be a hub, there were lots of things that they had to show that they were ready to jump, ready to do it, ready to measure. I had connections with educators, with business, with parents. Mm-hmm. And so there was a large process to qualify to begin with, and a few of those hubs are still just now coming online. But I think that it really gives people all over the state an opportunity to connect with their counterparts in other parts of the state, mm-hmm. and then be supported, but not necessarily directed out of Salem by the Early Learning Division there. If you look back at the legislation that created some of this, I just wanted to read a little bit out of a 2012 Oregon law that defines what is a child at risk as they look at the early learning system. I might have thought that was a child who had a special need, someone who would end up in special education, someone who was in the foster care system or whatnot, but it's much broader than that. The legislature defined it as a child who is at risk of not entering school ready to learn due to factors including but not limited to living in a household that is near poverty, living in inadequate or unsafe housing, having inadequate nutrition, living in a household where there is significant or documented domestic conflict, disruption, or violence, having a parent who suffers from mental illness, who engages in substance abuse, or who experiences a developmental delay or an intellectual disability, a child who lives in circumstances under which there is neglect or abusive childcare, having unmet health care and medical treatment needs, or having a racial or ethnic minority status that is historically underserved. The language that we use a lot these days is looking through the equity lens. Mm-hmm. And with that very broad definition, it allows for a large catch basin to be able to reach out and find children through screening who are at risk, develop some early intervention programs so that by the time they are ready to enter kindergarten, they've already got many of the supports and they're not years and years behind. Specifically, tell us some stories about what goes on in your hub and in your neighborhoods, and bring those kids to life for us.
All right. Well, I would say that we have in Multnomah County about 64,000 children under the age of 6 who live in poverty. So even we've just, as hard as it is to identify the other risk factors that you're identifying, we've chosen to look at poverty. So that's 64,000 children. The interesting thing for me is that 60% of the children who live in, 70% of the children who are in poverty in our county are children of color. So a lot of what we're experiencing as we try to revive the system here is that a lot of anti-poverty programs were designed for dominant culture or white children. They were designed by administrators who came from a white background, and 7 out of 10 kids are children of color. It's a pretty we're headed into a very different Multnomah County in the next 15 years than we're experiencing right now. Half of the children, or maybe it's right at 48% of children under 6 are children of color in our county. So it's we're really moving in a very different direction. And that's why in our hub, not only have we identified children living in poverty as our priority population, but we've also identified children of color of all income levels, knowing that most of the children who are of color are living in poverty, because 6 out of 10 children who are under age 6 are children of color. So no, I'm saying that wrong. 6 out of 10 children of color live in poverty. So the vast majority of children that are of color in poverty. So we are focused very carefully as we produce new programming and we make some new investments. We've had about close to $2 million total to invest in the last 9 months that we've been a hub, in investing that in communities of color. And for us, that means we invest in places where the services for children are provided by people that look like them, that they're provided through organizations that are managed by people that look like the children that are being served. And that has that sometimes is a little bit of a political powder keg, as you might imagine.
So one day when I was visiting you in the office, you were doing a reading project that was quite innovative.
So we did get, through the state early literacy grant, we were able to invest about $100,000 in the community. And the intent originally was that the library, who's a great partner of ours, would create materials to help parents understand that early literacy for little kids begins by talking, singing, writing, all those sorts of things, playing. It's really conversation. It doesn't have to be reading a book. And then they were going to just translate that into 5 or 6 different languages and hand out these materials. And we said, no, we're not doing that. Instead, to our library partners, you guys can be the technical advisors, and we're going to raise up and uncover leaders in the communities that you want to serve, and they're going to write the materials. And it created this process that has been very rewarding for us in that, for example, in the Vietnamese community, then they were able to for the first time, they were like, "You mean we're not translating Twinkle Twinkle Little Star into Vietnamese?" And I was like, "No, we're not. You can write in this book songs that you sing." And so they've created, I didn't bring them with me, I should have, these lovely materials that are, when you put them together, they are clearly not translated. They are Native American, they are Latino, they are Vietnamese, they are Russian, and they come from them. And the library has really been willing to flex and adapt, and we're willing to take sort of the second seat and let these leaders come to the fore. And in fact, we just discovered that the library has always published these little booklets of nursery rhymes that they hand out at the library and around the library. And this year, when they reprinted them, instead of Twinkle Twinkle translated and Mother Goose translated into Vietnamese and Spanish, they now have stories and rhymes that were created by those communities. So we feel like, oh, that's an organizational, that's a real change that we're starting to see. So I'm feeling in the communities that we're working with this new sense of, they're still tentative about us, like it could all go away, but there's this sort of burgeoning sense of, well, we really know what's best, and you guys are really trusting us to do this. And we've started to talk about children at risk. Instead, we talk about children at promise, because just as you saw in the video here that like the Abecedarian study group, they went to college. It's not like they are at risk and will always be labeled at-risk kids. We believe there's tremendous promise in them, and so it's been the slow starting to shift of power, so that the people that really know these kids best are really the ones making decisions.
And feeling empowered to do that.
Very much so.
It was only in 2012 that the state first looked at a children's budget, determining where the money going towards kids was housed, because they had what they called silos. The Health Administration had some of those programs. Human Services had some of those programs. The Department of Education had some of those programs, and they rarely talked to each other. And so in 2012, for the first time, the legislature required that a children's budget be developed. That didn't mean that there was any more money, but it did mean that for the very first time they identified where all those funding streams were coming from. And federally, as well as in the state of Oregon, these programs have developed over the last 40, 50 years, and there were tremendous numbers of different streams, and an organization chart of what came into the state, what went through the state government and went out to local people in the county children and family organizations, was just like a bowl of spaghetti. Mm-hmm. So trying to figure out where the money came from, how the money was being used, whether it was reaching the most at-risk kids was a tremendous challenge. So with the advent of some of the legislation, and with the advent of looking at the children's budget, and with the direction of a group appointed by the governor called the Early Learning Council, they were directed to really combine many of those programs. So for the first time, early learning was integrated with Head Start, with Oregon Pre-K, with early intervention and early childhood special education. They were also directed to oversee screening and developmental readiness for young children, and to maintain accountability for early learning efforts, and to report back to the Oregon legislature. In the study that you have, you'll see that there is a 2015 report to the legislature that talks about the hubs, and they will come back again and again and say, this is what we're doing, and this is a streamlining. Those of you who spent your career in education, especially if you spent your career in elementary education, we had people on the committee who said, is this the next big hurrah? Is this one going to last 2 years before they change the program and do something different? Or is this what's really going to make a difference to identify those young kids and follow them through? So they've set up some mile markers to say what we do at age 3 needs to connect it through to 3rd grade, so that we know if we start working on early learning, reading, that these kids will be ready to read. And it's usually about third grade that the schools start sorting out kids who say, oh, well, they're kind of slow, they're not making it, we need to look at special ed. And there's a lot of research that shows that if you are reading by third grade, you're going to succeed and you're going to graduate from high school. If you're not reading by third grade, then that's the first mile marker that says that there are some problems. So Molly, you're focusing primarily on what ages in your program?
We are charged from prenatal through age 6, but we also have in our outcomes, we're responsible for third grade reading scores. So we think about it like 0 to 8. That's really what we think about. And really in many, many parts of the academic world, 0 to 8 is early childhood. There's really, if you know third graders, between second graders and fourth graders, it feels like there's a real massive shift. So that's our population.
And then at the state level, it's nice to tell these different agencies that they should work together, but if they're not measured by their results, or if that's not part of their directive in state legislation, then it depends upon goodwill. So as the hubs have begun their process, for the first time they've reached out in both the regional area as well as the state area, work together with DHS, work together with the CCOs in that area, and found ways that they could measure and help each other. CCOs are rewarded financially for prevention and preventive health care. So being able to help the kids get those immunizations early, being able to identify special health risk and intervene at an earlier time reduces the cost for the regional CCOs and the healthcare costs later. So there's a win-win there in connecting together. And then the ERDC childcare funding that flows through to low-income people or people who are in school comes through Human Services, but the quality of those programs can really make a difference. So it's up to the Early Learning Division and the hubs in some ways to be able to mandate the quality of that early learning program. So there begins to be an intermarriage between those different agencies. What's happening in Portland?
Well, I keep telling people, okay, we're barely 9 months old, since we've had a contract. And when you think about a 9-month-old, like they jabber a lot. That's what I feel like. I do a fair amount. And they can't really move purposefully. And I feel like, okay, I do that a fair amount. One day I'm going to crawl. The coordinated care organizations, the CCOs, they're like a year ahead of us, maybe. And if you think it's crazy trying to coordinate the early learning world, trying to coordinate Kaiser and Legacy for just a small part of it is just, coordinate your Medicaid billing. I mean, it's like everybody's in transition and system change, and it's been very fun. So what I think that what I have appreciated in our Portland world and in our Multnomah County world has been that our partners, as you identify, DHS, the city, the county, including health department and many other things, that they all have really been on board with this idea that early investment is the right investment. We talk a lot about the social determinants of education, and I think for young children, it's one of the places where you really see it clearly that if little kids, it's true for older kids, but it's easier to see for little kids, if they're not eating, if they don't have a place to sleep at night, if they don't have people who are stable and secure around them, then how are they going to really survive in kindergarten, So it helps the school system, it helps DHS to all think about, oh yeah, we also need good health. Oh yeah, they need a place to live. Oh yeah, they need food. And our job as the hub is to bring all those people together. And I often tell the governor's office, really what you've charged us to do is solve racial discrimination, because we know that the vast majority of kids that are not being successful in school are children of color. So something's going, and those kids can't learn. So what's happening? I mean, it's a very big task. It looks like it's just get the kids school ready, but it's substantial. And And I'm really glad that I have partners in health and in human services and, the city and the county to help figure it out. Because it's not just like when you saw the Perry preschool study on the slides or in the film, it's not a small thing. It has enormous implications. So we're just beginning with our partners to look at a project that we might do together in possibly with Home Forward, which is the Housing Authority of Portland, in the New Columbia housing area to give those big systems a chance to practice playing together. But they need some practice, I'll say.
And so you heard the terms return on investment a great deal as you were watching the video. And the number that is really substantial right now is about every dollar invested returns $8 throughout the lifetime of that child. And that's in being able to do without the special education services for many of them. It's being able to finish school without dropping out. It's having the skills to maneuver and figuring out what technical program or college program or something else will serve them later. And it also is about the lack of need for money for juvenile justice or for incarceration at a later point. And there's a tremendous amount of research on healthcare, too, that says that if we can catch those kids early and intervene at that point with medical issues, then we save a lot of money there, too.
Yes, they're healthier as adults.
There's the language is budgeting over a 10-year period. If you work in a corporation, as I did for many years, you're always looking at quarterly returns.
Yeah.
If you're working within the state and you have budgets, you're working on a biennium, what you get funded for 2 years, and there's a lot of pressure to be able to show results during that 2-year period. So if we looked out over a 10-year time frame instead, we could really have an opportunity to reinvest the money that has been saved and put it back into the program again.
It's unfortunate that the 10-year timeline is just it's too long for our attention span. We can't do it. I think I'm going to editorialize a minute here, but I think about the amount of energy that's put into making Head Start prove themselves over and over again. Who has to do that? It's crazy. Like you've got excellent top quality studies that but why? Why? I don't get it. But yeah, the 10-year return is a tough one. And I find that as a hub, it's hard for me to sell. I'm having to sell a reinvestment in this system at 9 months.
And so the contracts with the state for the hubs are fairly short. You're already gathering data now to show your results so that you can have that next contract. And the hubs themselves need to show the results to the legislature. And as that is moving through this year, they have about a 4-year time frame to be able to come back with some very substantial metrics to show that what they're doing really does make a difference for funding.
Right. And we don't have funding to provide services. We have funding to coordinate and align these big systems.
Which is one of the difference between the county commissions on children and families that existed before and the hubs that are here now. The hubs don't have this bag of money. They're not Santa Claus. They can't pass out the money.
Which because I'm glad for.
You really aren't the funding source, you're the coordinating source to be able to pull all of those together. And Janet, I see that you're gathering up some of those cards now. Why don't you bring them on up as you get them, and Molly and I will find some opportunities to go over some of those questions. I've come to the conclusion that something has happened to Bill tonight, so we're going to have to speak for Bill too. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in Washington County?
He owes me big time, that's what. Washington County is about 3 months old, maybe, and they are organizing themselves around their primary population, which is Latino. That's the main culture culture group they have in Washington County. They have also invested heavily in an idea that's very exciting to me. It's called a family resource manager. They've placed experts in local schools to be sort of like our community school system that we have in Multnomah County, to be the one-door access so that families with young children can come to a school and get hooked up with additional services through their sector partners. But they really are, really it's been 3 months probably that they've been in
Here's a
operation.
wonderful segue. Someone has written, I have a three-year-old boy twins who were not using words. After 4 months in early learning intervention in Washington County, they're using their words, they're counting more, and they're tracing alphabet letters and saying the names of the letters.
That's exciting.
So that's a good testimony.
It's, boy, that's fortunate that those kids got in. That's just great, yeah.
So what percentage of children who should be in Head Start, and I'm going to broaden that to say Head Start or pre-K programs, you can speak to both of them if you want, are enrolled, and how many of them are still on waiting list in Oregon as a whole and in Multnomah and Washington County?
I have no idea.
Okay.
It's, I think we're looking at on the whole, if I quote a number, it's going to be wrong, but I think that statewide,
I think we're serving about 50%.
I think so. I know that in Multnomah, some of the Head Starts just cut off waiting lists. They just don't hold them. I think at Mount Hood, which covers East County, was up to 1,000. That's it's very normal to be on a Head Start waiting list for 2 or 3 years.
So it's one of those wonderful programs. Some money flows through from the feds. The state provides some funding as well, but there's not enough for everyone who's
Right.
waiting. And what they've decided to do in this state is develop a patchwork of programs. Some of them are offered through Head Start, some are through Early Head Start. In some areas, school districts offer pre-kindergarten programs as well as kindergarten programs. And in some other areas, there are programs for lower income kids as well. Moving through the legislature right now is a bill that would provide funding for 4-year-old pre-K programs for all families who are under 2%. 200% of the poverty guidelines. And so that will broaden it a little bit, but there is indeed still a very long waiting list.
Right. And the Head Starts, at least in our area, only take families that are at 100% of the federal poverty level. So they're making, if you make like 30,000 and you're a family of 4, you don't qualify. You make too much. And
I think that that's pretty true across the whole state. So expanding it to 200% of the poverty level. And we know that those are families that are still just barely surviving that would help. And here's a segue into other expenses. How does the cost of housing affect children's ability to learn? What's being done to assist a child's family who does not have access to housing that they can afford?
Yeah, so here's a stat for you. A household income for a family of 4 that's living at 185% of the federal poverty line, and we use that often as a more accurate measure of poverty. That's what schools use for free and reduced lunch. So if you're a family of 4 at that poverty line, you make you can make $44,000 a year. So that's about $3,600 a month. And the median rent in Multnomah County is $1,500 a month. So 50%, if you're at this kind of elevated poverty line, goes to rent. So we are definitely invested in partners that are looking to help with, and housing is scarce. You probably know this, but in Portland, I find that Home Forward, the former Housing Authority of Portland, has been this incredibly flexible and innovative partner. They've just, you may know them because they run New Columbia, but they also have done this great project on the west side across from the Jewish Community Center, where they have their low-income housing section, and they have attached a Head Start to it so that the kids that are in the housing section can go right into that Head Start and have priority, and that the parents that are in the low-income housing are able to be trained as as teachers' assistants in that Head Start, where they can earn CDA qualification, a Child Development Associate, and move on up. So we are really looking forward to figuring out how to work with them around housing security. It's as important to me, I think, as childcare security, which is, as you saw in the film, an enormous issue.
So how many children in Multnomah County are in programs like Abecedarian that we saw?
We were asked that by the state when we had to apply for a hub, and we just did some, who knows, because there's no central database, there's no unique identifiers, but we pulled some leaders together and made our best guess at those kids that are either in a program like Abecedarian or are receiving high quality home visiting services or in Head Start, and the number we got to is 7,000. So we're looking at 64,000 in need, and 7,000 are getting as best we can guess. Yeah.
So it's still a patchwork system.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the film focused heavily on the return on investment to communities. Have there been attempts to track this locally? Yes, good question. There is the Center for Evidence-Based Research, headquartered at Oregon State, or OHSU, Oregon Health Sciences University. And they are tracking exactly what that return on investment is. The legislature has asked them to do that. And there's another linkage there. Pam Curtis chairs that program, and she is also the chair of the Early Learning Council. Mm-hmm. And
Smart woman.
Then they are also doing some work with the Department of Human Services, looking at the risk factors for foster care. Mm-hmm. What kind of prevention could keep kids out of foster care? And this is evidence-based research, so that they've looked at all of the different factors. And again, that could be a very large and substantial discount of cost to the state. So nationally, the latest figures that I've shown on a very conservative basis are about $8 for every dollar invested, and we'll have those numbers specifically for Oregon as time goes on in just a bit. If efforts to expand early education are underway, what is being done to expand and improve university programs to prepare early learning educators? Elementary education programs cannot do this. Their faculty is not knowledgeable about birth to 6.
Yes. Whoever wrote that, I'm totally there. Yes. There's a couple of interesting programs that are happening at the college level here in Portland to figure out how do they do the early learning piece for their elementary ed. It's something we're paying attention to. Our colleagues at Children's Institute are working on that as well. I think Concordia is paying a lot of attention to that issue, and so is Portland State. And there's also, I think at Portland State, I'm not sure about Concordia, there's also a lot of interest in figuring out how do you equip early childhood educators with both a general education focus and a special education focus, because as we saw in the video, that there's a great deal of work that can be done early on to address opportunity gaps that can keep people, little kids, up into the general education population as they go. So it's of great interest to me, this idea of how do we help teachers become more skilled in understanding the young years. And one of the things that we as a hub have done with the little piece of investment we had is to bring kindergarten teachers and early learning educators together into a professional development group. Most of our public schools here use it's called PBIS, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, as a classroom behavior, just really school-wide, to help reduce push-out and pro-social behaviors. And kindergarten teachers then are using the same program in their school as applies to 6th graders. And 5-year-olds are really a lot closer to the 4-year-olds in Head Start than they are to the 6th graders. So we thought, well, what if we were to get those kindergarten teachers and those Head Start and other early childhood professionals who use an early childhood version of this PBIS and get them together, and that's just been fabulous. It's like watching people fall in love with each other because they go like, the kindergarten teachers are like, oh, you get it, and like, yeah. So I think that the more that we can combine those professional development, link those two worlds together. I feel like lots of times my job is I'm a cultural broker. I can talk K-12 and I can talk early childhood, and I have to help them understand each other.
The interpreter.
The interpreter, yes, that's me. Yeah.
And this is the first year, as we go into 15-16, that all schools statewide will be offering full-day kindergarten. And there's also a move underway to make sure that
Hey! Oh, sorry.
Hello, Bill. How are you?
You get all the next question.
Oh, good.
I'm done.
I think that Molly has done an outstanding job of representing not only Multnomah, but Washington
Oh, good.
County.
I had no doubt.
We are being videotaped today, and this will be on government television and shown as well. So if you will, for not just everyone who's here, but also for the folks who'll be watching it later, tell us just a little bit about yourself. And you have a long history with early learning.
Sure. My name is Bill Thomas. I'm currently serving as the Early Learning Director, parallel to Molly's position in Washington County for our regional early learning hub, which is called Early Learning Washington County, which is a little different than Early Learning Multnomah, because people might think we're Early Learning Washington if we didn't say Washington County, and that just wouldn't do. So, and also because as those of us who live in Multnomah County know, folks who live in Washington County are just a little bit concerned about being swallowed by Multnomah County. So it's important that we have our
rivalry.
Our own definition. But the Early Learning Hub in Washington County, like Multnomah, is a partnership between United Way of the Columbia Willamette and, in this case, Washington County Department of Health and Human Services. I was, before becoming the early learning director, had been the director of the Commission on Children and Families in Washington County for, 8 or 10 years. And so we were one of the counties that successfully made the transition. And so when Chris said I'd been involved in early learning before, of course, the commission system had historically always been involved in its larger mandate of ensuring that children and their families from 0 to 18 had their needs identified and met in terms of the range of services and supports that they would need to promote their potential and maximum wellness. The focus of the early learning hubs is of course only on ages 0 through 6 rather than 0 through 18, and it's clearly with more focused goals. Are we doing okay?
You're doing great.
Okay. More focused goals on ensuring that children 0 through 6 are ready for kindergarten. Some hubs, ours included, have appended to that goal and are reading at grade level by 3rd grade, because we really don't believe that you can kind of separate out the one major metric that we have for the success of young children, which is reading at 3rd grade level, because there have been so many national studies that have been made and normed across a whole variety of populations that indicate if kids are on track at 3rd grade, they're much more likely to be able to graduate from high school and be successful in their school lives, likelihood of going to college, etc. But if kids aren't reading at 3rd grade, they're much less likely to be successful in school, much more likely to drop out, much more likely not to graduate from high school, much more likely to get involved in the criminal justice system, in the alcohol and substance abuse, etc. So that we're very cognizant that there really has to be a very clear continuum of what's being called the P3 prenatal, or some people say preschool, but
Right.
prenatal
And then
to
on a
third grade.
statewide level, I'm hearing the terminology P20. So a seamless system, really starting with prenatal, linking age 3 to grade 3, and then that transition through ninth grade, and then that transition into 2 years of either technical school or the beginning of college. Sometimes many of the high schools now are being able to get college credit, so that whole P20 is a nomenclature as well. Can you talk about your population? What percentage of children have you identified being at risk, and particularly talk a little bit about the equity lens?
Excuse me. There are about 54,000 children 0 through 6 who live in Washington County, slightly less than the population of Multnomah County. We've identified 29,980 of those children who we believe are at risk for not being ready for kindergarten, which is, do the math, 54%, something like that. So the majority of children in Washington County. Washington County is a very different demographic population than Multnomah County. Washington County has the largest number of Hispanic residents in the state of Oregon. Not the highest percentage. The highest percentage is in Marion County, I believe, but has the largest number of Hispanic residents, has the largest number of Hispanic children and youth from 0 to 18, the largest number of Hispanic children 0 through 6. We also have the largest population of Asian American children number in the state of Oregon, and actually the largest percentage as well. But the reason for those demographics are quite different. And I'll speak to that in the equity lens in just a moment. But I grew up in Portland, and Washington County was kind of always suburban and largely white. It still is largely white, but rapidly becoming one of the most diverse counties in Oregon. The reason for that was because of the really twofold, because of the nursery industry. In western Washington County, there's a lot of agriculture still in the county. It's more agricultural than Multnomah. There were initially many large migrant population, and then those migrants settled in, and so there are a large number of Hispanic American residents in western Washington County, in Forest Grove, Cornelius. But increasingly, there are Hispanic residents throughout Washington County. And at the same time, because of the Silicon Valley development, there are a diversity of Asian American residents. Some who have come to work at Intel, and some who are refugee populations, immigrant populations. So we have a very we talk about the foundations of our early learning hub as being four in nature. First, the goals that I mentioned, that ready for kindergarten, reading by third grade, families are stable and attached, and services are coordinated and effective. That's one of our foundations. Our second foundation of our hub is our equity lens. When we did our analysis of the population of kids at risk in Washington County, we identified six subgroups of children 0 through 6 who were at risk for not being ready for third grade. Children of color, and I'll come back to that in a second, because not all children of color are equally at risk. Children who live in economically disadvantaged households or live in low-income households. Children who are disabled. Migrant and homeless children. English language learners. And children who are abused and trauma affected, I think is the way that we phrase it. I think that's 6 group. Did I get 6? If you look at the data for kids in the state of Oregon who are not reading at third grade level in the third grade, and they're exactly the same kids that are not graduating from high school. They are, I think I get this in pretty much order. Kids with disabilities. That's, I guess I may not. Kids with disabilities, English language learners, African American children, Hispanic children, Native American children, Pacific Islanders, because they've now broken the Asian American population on the census between Pacific Islanders. They used to have them merged with Asian Americans. And migrant children, English language learners, I think I mentioned that. There's the data on homeless children is very sketchy. The data on abused and trauma-affected children is mostly reflected in children with disabilities. But those populations are significantly at risk for not reading in third grade and not being and not graduating from high school, exactly the same population groups. Asian American kids are at less risk. Now, that's not true for all Asian American populations. There are subgroups within the Asian American community, children of Vietnamese households, Hmong households, Cambodians who are at significant risk. It's just that's the data. That's as far as the data is parsed to help us understand who's truly at risk and how we need to focus resources in addressing disparities. And our equity lens, I'll just finish this and then you can ask another question. Our equity lens basically says that that charges our hub and our partnership in our hub with reducing the disparities of opportunity and disproportionate risks that these 6 subgroups of children face. Disparities of opportunities and disproportionate risks.
So here's a question from someone on a card that says, what are you doing to support parents? Working together with the unit of both the child and the parent. Molly, you want to address that first and then Bill?
Yeah, certainly for me, little kids are not, that you can't separate them from the parents, from the family is how we think about it, because we know we have a lot of grandparents raising kids. So we don't think about any of the programming that we fund or that we invest in as being standalone for little kids. It's all involves it by our equity lens that we use, that our parent council developed for us. It has to be parent involved and family centered, or we won't do that level of work. Is that kind of the question?
Yes, Bill?
Yeah, our third foundation of ours, this just fits right in, is family engagement, family and an authentic family voice, and providing resources to families. We do that in multiple ways. We have a parent advisory council. It's just getting off the ground, and whereas the one in Multnomah County has been working for a longer period of time and has developed principles, I think that the hub has adopted. But we believe very strongly in family engagement. We established a system of family resource managers in Washington County. We don't have the Sun School system. We don't have the kind of history of the development of resources in supporting schools in low-income neighborhoods. What we had developed over time was family resource centers that were based in our 7 school districts in Washington County, but there was only one in each school district, and we had long ago partnered with the schools to say, we want you to operate these family resource centers. When the hubs came along, we said, what we'd like for you to do, we can no longer fund the family resource centers as such. We want to fund early childhood family resource managers, even though that 0 through 6 is not your mandate, school districts. We would really like for you to take on this responsibility, and they agreed to do that. So we have a system of family resource managers, not very big, half one in Sherwood, 1 in Tigard-Tualatin, 2 in Beaverton, 1.5 in Hillsborough, and 1 for Forest Grove, Banks, and Gaston, to provide not case management, but to provide information referral, linking families to resources, helping families with young children identify what their needs are so that their kids can be successful and be ready for school.
So Molly answered for us earlier. In Washington County, how many children who qualify for Head Start or early Head Start or other pre-kindergarten programs are being served, and how many are on waiting list?
We have 2 Head Start providers in Washington County, Community Action, which has about 900 kids, and Oregon Child Development Corporation, Coalition, whatever it is.
OCDC.
No, OCDC.
OCD.
That has about 900 kids. So about 1,800 kids of those 29,000. Now, that's 29,000 is 0 through 6, not in 3 or 4 year olds. But you can do the math and you can say it's not a very big percentage who are in Head Start or early Head Start, Margaret Head Start, or Oregon Pre-K in Washington County. And there are waiting lists. The waiting lists are probably at least half again as long as the number of kids who are enrolled in Head Start.
Well, through the marvels of television, this show will be aired over and over again in the future. And I know that there will be people out there who will want to get in touch with both of you and who will also want to know information about this. So if you both briefly could provide your contact information, telephone number, so that a grandma, a grandpa, a neighbor who wants to talk with you about a young child can get in touch. Multnomah County, Washington County.
All right, so my name is Molly, Molly. Last name is Day, D-A-Y. And probably the best way to reach me by email is, let's do it this way. It's Molly, M-O-L-L-Y, and then the letter D at unitedway-pdx.org.
Okay.
And my number is, and I'm happy to take a cell phone call or a text, is 971-409-7314. And I put
One more time on that phone number.
971-409-7314. You can also just contact United Way of the Columbia Willamette, and they'll get you in touch with me. And I put a couple of my business cards at the back.
Great.
Thank
And Bill?
Sure. My name is William Thomas. I call myself Bill, but so which is why my email address is William_Thomas at co.washington.or.us. And even though I may say it, there's no R in Washington. So William_Thomas at co.washington.or.us.
And a phone number.
Phone number. I can't remember our office phone number, so my cell phone number, treat it gently, is 503-380-1665. 503-380-1665.
And many of you in the room have already received and read through this. It is available online from the League of Women Voters in about a 68-page, very interactive format with lots of other network information you can find on the internet. Or you can simply go to voteoregon.org/children at risk. That's the League of Women Voters, voteoregon.org/children at risk. Thank you very much for being with us tonight and for listening, and we're happy to talk with you later. Thank you.